couple of things that amaze me that the world is not really talking about on this Egypt story. One, the coming insurrection. That this is a domino. And as it emboldens, and as the president said, it's just change. People are crying out for change, and it's a new generation just like you doing it. As that is encouraged, and as one falls, what falls next? And the connections. I want to show you a member of the Socialist Workers' Party in Europe, in England, where she had never seen anything like this. And now she's bringing that home to England. Watch.
I was lucky enough to spend 4 days in Tahrir Square this week. And I have to say, I mean, I've been a revolutionary for, over 25 years, but to actually witness a revolution taking place in front of your very eyes, what I saw in Tahrir Square was the most inspiring and humbling experience. They're not broken. They're still fighting, and they're a beacon of hope, not just in Egypt, but across the Arab world and across the globe. We need to give them solidarity. We give them solidarity here, but I tell you what, one bit of good solidarity would be, why don't we try and bring down our own government, the warmongers and the cutters? Let's do that.
Oh. Okay, why no one in the press will talk about the larger ramifications is beyond me. And then there's one other thing. We talk to the people in Israel, or talk about them, but has anybody really put themselves in the shoes of the Israelis? This is on their border. This is what has helped keep their country stable. Dory Gold is here. He is the former Israeli ambassador to the United Nations and author of The Rise of Nuclear Iran, How Tehran Defies the West. Dory, welcome, sir. How are you?
Thank you, Glenn. Good to be with you.
Can you tell me, first of all, what when you heard that he might step down today, and there was no idea what comes next, and you see what's happening in Jordan and on Saturday in Algeria, et cetera, what is the average Israeli feeling?
I think there are really 2 points that come from the current developments that we're seeing. Number one, I think Israelis are concerned that the peace treaty between Israel and Egypt from 1979 remain something that is preserved. We really do believe that many of the Egyptian national security leaders see the peace treaty with Israel as an Egyptian interest, and therefore we're hopeful that there won't be any change. But there are many new forces coming into the Egyptian political system, perhaps in the future, like the Muslim Brotherhood, who are already calling for tearing up the peace treaty. No, that's our number one concern.
Well, hang on just a second. I just have to stop you there. Our intelligence chief said today, no, the Muslim Brotherhood, they're totally fine. They're peaceful people. Don't worry about them, Dory.
Well, frankly, I'm just going to have to be blunt about it. He is totally wrong, and whoever prepared his prepared statement for the U.S. House of Representatives is totally wrong. How do you determine what the Muslim Brotherhood thinks? How can we intellectually ascertain that? We have to look at their public statements, and we have to look at who is coming out of the Muslim Brotherhood and what are they doing. They have something called a supreme guide. In Arabic, it's called a murshid. And their supreme guide, Mohammed Badi, said in September 2010, just recently, in a statement that he put out to his fellow Muslim brothers, that the only way to create a new generation of Muslims is through jihad. And he said, we have to love death as much as our enemies love life. When he talked about jihad, he's talking about military campaigns. He talked about opening up the borders for the mujahideen, for the jihad fighters. Now, that is not somebody who is moderate. That is somebody who is preaching a return to conflict. Second of all, who are the people that came out of the Muslim Brotherhood? There are 2 people that are important for our security and yours to remember. Abdullah Azzam from the Jordanian Muslim Brotherhood, Mohammed Qutb from the Egyptian Muslim Brotherhood, both of whom taught at King Abdulaziz University in Jeddah in the 1970s, to a young Saudi student named Osama bin Laden.
Yeah, it's
Bin Laden's ideology and Al-Qaeda have their roots in the Muslim Brotherhood.
All right.
Very simply.
We just, El Baradei has just tweeted that Egypt is about to explode and the army has to save the country. How do you, is that helpful? How do you assess the situation?
Well, I think President Mubarak has turned over his powers to Omar Suleiman, the vice president, and hopefully they can transition Egypt safely and securely in a way that satisfies what the Egyptian people need. But, you know, military coups, abrupt changes in Egypt are not something that serves, I think, the interests of the Egyptians or our interests in Israel or in the rest of the world.
May I just ask you this, because we only have about a minute, but I want to get to this. This is a report on the Red and Green Alliance, and you can't get anybody in America to report on this. Can you explain what's going on in just London?
Yeah. In my own research institute, we wanted to understand how it was that Trotskyites and Islamists were working together to seek the boycott of Israel in British stores. And what we found was that this alliance, called the Red-Green Alliance, between the far left and Islamist groups, had been born in Britain, and in fact held conferences in Cairo between 2002 and 2007, where this alliance grew much stronger. And perhaps you saw evidence of it in the clip you showed earlier from the Socialist Workers' Party. That's a Trotskyite party.
Dory, I thank you very much for your coming on in the program, and know that there are millions of Americans that stand against Mubarak and stand against the things that are happening to the Egyptian people, but also stand with Israel. I don't know how this ends, but millions of Americans are praying for Jews all around the world and Israel every single night. God bless you.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much.
You bet. Back in a minute. I want to spend a minute here on something that it's so clear to me what's happening in Egypt, but maybe not. What's going on in Egypt has at least a great potential of being a repeat of what happened here in Iran in 1979, the revolution. But there's more. Iran didn't change the whole thing. Egypt has a chance of being the first domino to fall. So first, I want to talk about 1979 revolution in Iran. And I wanted to talk to somebody who is actually there. This is a guy who actually went in and tried to rescue the hostages, and no one would listen to him then. Joining me now from Dallas is retired Army Lieutenant General William Boykin. General, how are you, sir?
I'm well, Glenn. How are you?
I am good. I think I can feel a little bit of the frustration that you must have had in 1979 when no one would listen to you and no one would listen to you. You were calling then and saying, stop, this is not what you're saying it is. Can you bring us back into 1979 and kind of walk us through any parallels that you might be seeing here?
Well, yeah, as the Shah left Iran and we began to see these students rising up in what was at that time called a democratic movement, and later we recognized it as an Islamic movement. They eventually took the U.S. Embassy and took ultimately 53 American hostages and held them there for 444 days. And then the Ayatollah returned 30 days after these students had succeeded in taking over our embassy and our hostages, and what was touted as a democratic revolution very rapidly was recognized as an Islamic revolution. And today we have an Islamic Republic in Iran and Sharia law and a nascent nuclear program.
But everybody at the time said that couldn't happen. When you're watching the news now and you're seeing this, How much of the time do you spend shouting at your television, "What is wrong with you? How do you not see this?"
Yeah, Glenn, you know, as Americans, as Westerners, we want to, I guess, see the best in all of this. But the reality is, and I will look at you now and say, we're going to see an Islamic Republic in Egypt, and it is going to be an Islamic Republic where Sharia law is the law of the land. And regardless of what the leadership of our country says and what our intelligence community says, the Muslim Brotherhood was created to establish global Sharia law. And that has not changed, and they tell us that. And we need to keep remembering that Anwar Sadat was killed by the Muslim Brotherhood because of his support for Israel in the Camp David Accords.
All right, so then let me take it, if you'll hold on just a second. Let me talk about the ramifications, because you're talking about a caliphate, but you also say that it will just first fall in as Egypt. This will be the first domino. Let's talk about the domino theory when we come back. With the retired Army Lieutenant General William Jerry Boykin. He's from Texas, so of course he's a straight-shooting guy. He's the author of Danger Close, and we were talking about what he believes is coming now. He said that an Islamic State he believes is coming to Egypt. I believe it as well. Maybe we're wrong. I trust the General. General, first, before I get into the cascading problem here, Egypt is a military that has special forces that were trained by our special forces. Their planes are our planes. Their tanks are our tanks. They are well trained, a huge military with all of our stuff. What does that mean in the hands of an Islamic State?
Well, first of all, I think the military, because of the training and influence we've had, have conducted themselves quite well. But if you look at the capabilities they had, as you pointed out, in the hands of an Islamic government, a government that is bent on destroying Israel, which is the stated, one of the stated missions of the Muslim Brotherhood, Israel must be very concerned about that, because the equipment they have is largely U.S. made.
Do you believe we're looking at war with Israel at any time in the near future?
You've seen the rhetoric, and I think Dory Gold made some very good points. You've seen the rhetoric since this started in Egypt about preparing for war, and that war is a war against Israel. Only God knows whether we'll actually have war there, but I would tell you that the Muslim Brotherhood is determined to destroy Israel. And I think there's a real threat.
Algeria, which is right off the coast of Spain in northern Africa, is going to have a huge day of rage, they're calling it. Been organized now for 15 days that we know of. And that is on Saturday. In Jordan, things are starting to fall apart. What happens to the Middle East now that this is falling apart in Egypt?
Remember, Glenn, there were two seminal events that increased the recruiting to the jihadist cause. One was 444 days that they held our hostages, and the other was when the Russians left Afghanistan defeated. The recruiting to the jihadist cause went off the scale because they proclaimed that Allah had shown them favor. That's what's going to happen now. They will be encouraged and emboldened, and there will be more of what we're seeing in Egypt now.
Back in a minute. Final thoughts. Or else, including, look out, gang, it's going to hit you here. From New York, good night, America.